Every year, African countries lose at least $50 billion in taxes, majorly through tax evasion. This is more than the continent receives as development aid. And while the focus on tax evasion is a necessary one, African countries need to widen the scope of the conversation on taxation and tax crimes. Now, tax crimes manifest in many forms. These include people not submitting tax returns to the tax authorities or even lying on the questions in order to reduce their tax burden. It also includes employers deducting taxes from employees and never paying it to the tax authority. Vendors, whether registered for VAT or not, sometimes charging VAT and never remitting it. It could also be entities submitting fraudulent invoices in an attempt to pay less tax. There's definitely more than one way to commit a tax crime. And many of our African economies are cheated out of billions in tax revenues, mainly by large foreign companies in the energy and resource sectors, but also increasingly now by small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, the continent's largest economy is looking to take on the issue of tax crimes. Nigeria's National Assembly has passed for second reading a bill that would establish the National Tax Crimes Commission as a separate and independent tax auditor for tax administration in the country. The sponsor of the bill, Senator Orji Uzokalu, pointed out that people are taking advantage of the vulnerabilities in Nigeria's tax system. What should be the scope of the commission? Where does this leave other players like the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission and the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offenses Commission? Today, we look at Nigeria's plans for a tax crimes commission. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru, Balogun. Joining me is Taiwo Oyedele. He's the Fiscal Policy Partner and Africa Tax Leader for PwC Nigeria. Taiwo, it's good to have you back on Business Edge. Welcome once again.
Thank you, Tolu, for having me.
So let's talk a bit about what the sponsor of the bill said in terms of why he believes a tax crimes commission is necessary. And he pointed out that a globalized economy and technological advancements are aiding people to take advantage of the vulnerabilities in our tax system. No system is foolproof, we know that. But do you really think the tax system and the tax administration in Nigeria is that vulnerable? What vulnerabilities lie in the system that allow us to lose as much money as we're losing?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, so indeed, the tax system in Nigeria is vulnerable. I think that would be the case for many countries around the world. Even the most developed countries continue to spend a lot of money in trying to fight tax crime. Because the thing about crimes generally, including taxation, is they tend to be a step ahead of the law, and they always explore loopholes to try and play their games. But I do think that in the case of Nigeria, we have not properly assessed what the problem is, where those problems are coming from, before trying to profile what the solution should look like. If you don't diagnose the problem, a disease correctly, you're going to administer the wrong drugs, and that will complicate the disease. It may even be fatal if you're not careful. So we should start by saying are there gaps in terms of fighting tax crime and enforcement? If so, where are those gaps and how can we close those gaps? That exercise hasn't been done. We haven't defined what a tax crime is. And this will vary from one country to another. In a country like Australia, if the tax authorities write you a letter and ask you to send information to them and you miss the deadline, that's a crime and you can be prosecuted for that. In many countries, that will not be a crime. It will just be a question of you have to explain to the authorities. Today, being 31st of March, is the deadline for filing personal income tax return. And every individual in Nigeria, including even if you are not an adult, right, who earns 30,000 naira per annum, not per month, 30,000 naira per annum or more, is required to file a return not later than today. So I can tell you 99% of Nigerians are not even aware because people think that once your PAYE has been deducted, then you are fine. So the question is, if you don't define what a crime is,
Yes.
we're going to create more problems than the solution we are seeking to solve with this bill.
And it's interesting you bring that up because there's also the issue of overlapping responsibilities with some of the existing organizations. But we'll get to that in a bit. And it seems in some ways that seeking to establish this tax crimes commission is also saying that Nigeria and the other entities involved in monitoring the system have been failing. There's conversations around who should pay taxes and how much should be paid, whether or not big businesses and multinational companies, as well as the wealthy, are paying their fair share of taxes as well. So shouldn't we be looking for legislation to circle around tax equity and making sure that the right people are paying their fair share versus creating yet another body, another organization within what is already a very complicated and burdened system?
Absolutely, absolutely. So there was a conversation a couple of days ago at the State House hosted by the president, and the conversation was on tax harmonization. We have all manners of taxes, all manners of agencies trying to collect taxes, all manners of agencies trying to do enforcement and tax audit, from EFCC to revenue mobilization to FRS to sometimes National Assembly. You have at the state level, you have customs, there's Nigerian Postal Service. This is actually a problem for us in Nigeria as it is currently, that we have duplications and overlapping roles and responsibilities all over the place. So what we actually need to do is to harmonize that. We do have a structural problem with the tax system. By design in itself, the tax system places more burden on the lower ladder of society than the middle class and the upper class. Not to talk about the elite and the politicians who actually decide whether they want to pay or not. And those issues are not being addressed by this bill, unfortunately. So if you have a situation whereby I can make a lot of money and find a way around it in terms of loopholes and not paying taxes, and then someone who earns 40,000 naira a month and barely surviving is paying PAYE, establishing a tax crimes commission will not address the problem. And we also know that in terms of setting the tone from the top, this is one area where we have failed as a country. The Auditor General for the Federation released a report recently. I think it was a report in terms of, maybe 2017 or 2018. I can't remember precisely. But that report shows that even the National Assembly, even the presidency, even the EFCC were not remitting the PAYE they were deducting on their staff.
Wow.
So this is non-compliance at the highest level, and nothing has happened to it. So if you set up a crimes commission, one, apart from the fact that it's duplicating the role of the tax authority, EFCC, ICPC, how do you enforce it when it's so glaring that the guys who are really violating at the highest level tend to be above the law?
And I think that's a massive question because it also then calls into question the moral authority of even the National Assembly to sort of put this forward. But let's talk about the overlapping responsibilities. Now, the Commission is expected to also use different strategies to ensure compliance to respond to taxpayers' grievances and complaints. But isn't this already work that the Federal Inland Revenue Service is supposed to do? And we see that there might be some overlap with the EFCC, FIRS, as well as the ICPC as specific organizations. So is there any way, if we insist, if the National Assembly assists in moving forward with this, to ensure that this Tax Crimes Commission stands independent? Yes, there might be complementary efforts, but that they won't be necessarily repetitive and duplications of the responsibilities and roles we already have existing with other companies.
I'll say it's almost impossible if this agency is established. It's impossible for there not to be more overlaps. There are already overlaps as we have it currently. For example, the Revenue Mobilization Fiscal Allocation Commission will tell you it's their role to monitor accretion to the Federation account. And the FRS says, well, when you are monitoring accretion to the Federation account, why are you going to taxpayers? You should be asking the FRS questions. You should be asking the NNPC questions, right? You should not go to taxpayers. You already have that overlap. And we're struggling with the fact there's a court case as we speak on this particular point. On top of that, you have the EFCC. They're doing financial crimes, economic crimes, and then suddenly they're also sending letters to taxpayers to say, I want to come to your organization to do my tax investigation. I say, well, you do not have the first right of tax investigation because you don't have the information, you don't have the knowledge and the expertise, right? So if somebody shows up today now and says that, Taiwo, you committed a crime because you sold a property and you did not pay the tax on it. And I say, well, that property wasn't even registered in my name. It was a company that I own. I can even tell you that the timing, of the payment is different. The due date is different. The filing. So there's so many technicalities before you can establish that there's a tax crime. And the only authority or the body that can do that is the Federal Inland Revenue Service in case of the federal government and the State Internal Revenue Service in the case of states. Because they have the data, they have the information, and they have the expertise. So they have to establish first and foremost that there has been a crime. Remember also we have to define what exactly falls within this definition of what is a tax crime. And then those tax authorities will then ask for help. They will be the ones to then refer to either the EFCC or ICPC. As we know in Lagos State, for example, they're even setting up their own Economic and Financial Crimes Commission.
Yes.
So you then refer to them. And ultimately, we have the court system where you then have to refer to the court because the language you find in the tax law is to say on conviction. So that conviction cannot be done by anyone other than the court. So why create another agency or commission only to duplicate and create overlaps in what already exists that is not being fully implemented? I can't remember the last time I heard anything. I've been practicing tax for more than 20 years that a single person has been jailed for committing tax crimes. It's not because there's no crimes commission, it's because the provisions we have currently, we're not implementing them.
Okay, so let's go to the next issue that I think might be a bone of contention, and that's about the independency of this proposed tax commission. Now, the sponsor of the bill, Senator Orji Uzokalu, wants the commission to report to the National Assembly, not to the Minister of Finance, like the FRS does, and not to the President, as you might expect with some of the issues within the EFCC and the ICPC. He describes the commission as an external examiner, a scrutinizer for checks and balances in tax administration. What would be the difference in having this commission report to the National Assembly versus reporting to the Finance Minister? What is the conversation around that? Is there a conversation around this issue of independence?
Reporting to the National Assembly actually makes it even worse. Because like I said, neither the National Assembly nor this commission, the way it's being proposed, has the powers to prosecute. So a commission cannot say, Taiwo, you are hereby guilty, you are going to jail for 10 years. There's no commission that can do that. National Assembly cannot do that, right? So if you now have a commission reporting to the National Assembly, the commission first does not have enough data to establish a crime. National Assembly has almost nothing other than when they ask you to print all manners of information, some of them not very useful, and bring to the National Assembly, and they do some horrid job between 1 or 2 days. That's not how to establish a tax crime. So at the end of the day, you need the tax authority, you need the Ministry of Finance, you need financial intelligence unit, you need exchange of information locally between agencies, you need exchange of information internationally. And when you establish all these facts, you go to court, and it is the court that will pronounce you as guilty or not guilty. It's not National Assembly. So everything with this proposal is just wrong. And I'm hoping, I'm praying, because sometimes you have to just pray in Nigeria, that somebody will see the reason why we can't afford another problem. On top of this, it's also the fact that there will be more budgetary allocation,
Yes.
expanded cost of governance that we complain about every single time.
Exactly. And then a commission will have either a DG or an executive secretary, PAs, and all of the things involved in that. But you said very clearly that everything is wrong with this proposal. So let's look at one thing that the sponsor did say. He said that such countries such as Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa, as well as the US, UK, Australia, and the Netherlands have similar bodies, and some of them have tax ombudsmen. So if we're saying that it's not necessarily the Tax Crimes Commission that can take us where we need to go with our tax administration system, What can we take from those who have such systems or such bodies and implement to clear up the space, to get something that is straightforward, that's easy for taxpayers to understand? As you mentioned today, March 31st, how many Nigerians are filing their tax returns and trying to meet the deadline? So what can we learn from those systems without necessarily bringing forth a whole new commission?
Yeah, very, very good question. So it is not exactly true that those countries mentioned by the sponsor have a similar organization or commission. That is not true. So there are generally about 3 or 4 different forms of dealing with tax crime in terms of setup and establishment around the world. You have the format where they sit within the tax authority. And that is the most common. That's what you find in more than 90% of the countries around the world. You have another format where there is a reference to another agency like the EFCC to handle the tax crime. And then there's a third one where you set up a separate organization, such as is being proposed here. And I can't remember of any country where this is the format. But having said that, many countries have is set up to ensure taxpayers' rights are protected, to ensure that crimes are properly investigated, including tax crimes. And they have them in form of the ombudsman. Okay, so you have taxpayers' rights association. Sometimes it's even led by the private sector, but we support through the legislation and the authorities. So we have different formats, and we see the way it's working. From South Africa to places like even Australia. If you go to the Australian Tax Authority's website, it's ATO, Australian Tax Authority website, you even see, they report almost on a daily basis the crimes that they have prosecuted. It's like on their website. It's not a separate agency or commission as we proposed here. So I do think that first, it's important to know what is being done around the world to learn best practices about what works and what doesn't work. But more importantly, you need to contextualize that and bring it home as to what is relevant and what can work within your own environment. For example, the point you made is the fact that even tax awareness and tax education, we haven't even done 1% of it in Nigeria. Vast majority of our people don't even know what they're supposed to do. Or sometimes we make sure that the law is so impossible to comply with. So 30,000 naira per annum means that the barber, the tailor, the plumber, the vulcanizer, every single person you can think of has violated this law by 12 midnight today if they don't file their returns. But how on earth is a tailor or a barber who can't even spell their name correctly to save their lives will be able to file returns? This is the reason why many countries have thresholds, because it just makes sense. You can't be taxing poverty and asking your people to do that which is impossible. That we haven't done in Nigeria, so I think we are jumping the gun actually with this commission bill.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap up with this. This conversation again about the tax crimes. We've talked about the issues with the finance bill, of course. The president signed December 31st, 2021, and that Finance Act now also has a number of tax reform measures. But a lot of it is coming back to the fact that African economies know that they are losing revenue. They need to increase their tax nets, widen the tax base, and also make sure that companies, particularly multinationals here on the continent, and wealthier Africans are paying their fair share. For us here in Nigeria, last year the FRS said that over 17 billion naira was owed to the government in the form of tax evasion by some defaulting companies whose addresses can no longer be traced. I just 17 billion. That's some say is actually an underestimate. But it's not just that. It was also reported last year that Nigeria may have lost about $178 billion, around 5.4 billion naira, to tax evasion by multinationals in 10 years. So once again, talking about tax crimes and the such, how big of an issue is tax evasion and tax defaults in Nigeria on a multinational scale, but also remembering that we're starting to see small and medium scale businesses themselves also default and evade taxes here in Nigeria and across the continent?
Yeah, no, tax evasion is huge. It's big. Anywhere in the world, it's much bigger in Africa, and it's much, much bigger in Nigeria. So I'll say Nigeria will easily rank as top 10, if not top 5, country in the world with the biggest, amount of tax evasion, and it cuts across. In fact, incidentally, while it's easy to bash and blame multinationals, actually in Nigeria, they're the most compliant set of taxpayers based on available data, even according to the FRS themselves. So when multinationals don't want to pay tax, they tend to do aggressive planning, transfer pricing, and avoidance. And the last thing they will do is evasion because they know the consequences of paying taxes. So you actually find more evasion with Nigerian-owned companies, small businesses, and Nigerian individuals, particularly the elite class and politicians. So the size of this evasion, if I want to estimate it, is easily multiples of what we collect in tax revenue. Our tax to GDP ratio is 6%. It should be somewhere around 20%. So you can easily say about at least 14% of our GDP is being lost every single year to tax evasion. And if you quantify that, you're looking at something close to 20 trillion naira. So all these estimates, of 17 here, they are grossly understated. Wow. This is very huge. In fact, for personal income tax, even for low-income countries, personal income tax is about 2.1% to GDP. In Nigeria, it's 0.5. So which means even for low income, and we are not even low income, we're middle income, we should be making like 4 or 5 times what we collect as of today in personal income tax, but we're not. And this is because of evasion. So it cuts across.
All right, Taiwo, the conversation around tax will not end today, but as different dimensions come about, we'll always reach out to you to give us more perspective on that. Taiwo Oyedele, thank you as always for joining me on Business Edge.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. And I actually worry about how many millions of Nigerians would actually be committing a crime if tax default was a crime as of midnight tonight, as my guest talked about, in terms of filing their tax returns. A larger conversation around tax awareness and education also needs to be had, not just in Nigeria, but also around the continent. You're watching Business Edge. Up next, I have a few stories to keep your eyes on. And for NC4 to watch, we start here in Nigeria, where the House of Representatives has asked the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, formerly the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, to provide details of the Trans-Saharan Pipeline construction project valued at $12 billion. The House specifically urged the NNPC to provide information regarding the implementation, funds utilization, and status of the project, while asking the company to review the National Gas Master Plan relating to the project to confirm the variables of today's global economy. On the eastern part of the continent, Kenya Airways has reversed pay cuts in light of signs of business recovery and MPs approving a 20 billion Kenyan shilling bailout. The carrier had at last month returned pay cuts of up to 25% in cash preservation efforts after the Treasury delayed wiring the bailout billions. Now, Kenya Airways chairman Michael Joseph said the airline started paying full salaries on the day it announced it had more than halved net losses to 15.8 billion shillings, helped by growth in revenue and some cost savings. The Democratic Republic of Congo's parliament has voted to remove Economy Minister Jean-Marie Kalumba from his post, blaming him for the soaring price of basic goods and mismanagement of the fishing industry, among other issues. Now, the minister has 48 hours to present his resignation following the vote of no confidence. He was nominated to the post last year by President Felix Tshisekedi. The motion signed by lawmakers laid out a raft of complaints, including lack of a policy to support local fishermen and frequent gas shortages, which have been driving up transport prices. And finally, the rand fell in early trade on Thursday as uncertainty over the war in Ukraine dragged on and commodity prices, which benefit the resource-rich country, fell. Earlier today, the rand traded at 14 rand 50 cents against the dollar, around 0.3% weaker than its previous close. Ukrainian forces are preparing for new Russian attacks in the east of the country as Moscow builds up its troops there after suffering setbacks near the capital, Kiev. President Vladimir Zelensky said on Thursday that all efforts are in preparation. And that's Business Edge today. Thank you for joining me. Download our mobile app, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, watch us on the platforms we're available, and of course, follow us on social media for all the latest from African business, finance, and the economy right here on Business Edge. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru Balogun. Do have a fantastic day.